And welcome to Auros in Auros IQ. And Josh has said he can take questions throughout and at the end. So keep those questions coming in chat and we'll get them answered. And so let's now welcome Technical Services Manager and Knowledge Aware Consultant from Auros Knowledge Systems, Josh Cullis, to the stage.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, like Amy said, we're going to talk a little bit about how we use Auros internally at our organization to manage various different processes. So we kind of started this presentation, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and we kind of walked through some of the ways that we get value out of the knowledge aware technique, some of the different items that are in Auros for us, and the things that we manage with the software. We started this whole thing. I'll kind of go through some of the learning points here, but we'll start with a background. Then we'll talk a little bit about an update on some of our use cases. So we have a few different things that we'll kind of go through. If people have questions, maybe about use cases that we've touched on in the past that aren't included today, feel free to add those into the chat and we can certainly address them. But then we'll talk a little bit about this idea of knowledge aware implementation maturity. So we talked in the beginner sessions, the breakout sessions, about kind of the roadmap of implementing knowledge aware. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll go through what it is at a high level. And then we'll also talk about our usages at a glance. So where we are, kind of where we've come from, all that kind of stuff. We'll go through some statistics at the end. So if we start with just the background for our knowledge aware implementation, I kind of put together a little bit of a timeline here. I won't go through all these different things, but it kind of shows the highlight of some of the processes that we've onboarded over time. I went back and we really started, we used the software for a long time, even before 2014. But when we really started to kind of apply this knowledge aware technique to internal processes, we started off with our software factory, or just the process of releasing the software, producing new enhancements, new features, that kind of stuff. And from there, it kind of expanded and we started to use it in other areas as well. And the area where it really started to take off and we started to produce some adjacent developments, or what we call them, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, was when we started to manage our seed project there. We started to do that. We saw a lot of value with the software factory. We saw a lot of value with the managing of a seed project, which is what we call the onboarding process of a new workflow or of a new activity. And as we started to see the value there, we then started to explore other uses of the software. So you can see, as we went throughout the years, there are a lot of different things that we've implemented, and we'll get into how many workflows and how many communities we have towards the end. But this is kind of a good high-level overview of the very important processes that we've done over time. It started in 2014. We're about 8 years later, and it's really starting to expand, and there's an incredible knowledge aware footprint at our organization. So if we talk a little bit about some of the use cases that we've gone over in the past, the first thing what we'll start with is employee hiring. So we first started managing our hiring process in 2016 in Auros. When we did that, it was extremely basic. We said we need to generate a job description. We're going to post it. We're going to review resumes. Then, we're going to hire people, and then we're going to take the job down. And as the customer base has started to expand, and as our, the concepts have started to expand, and the knowledge aware technique is really taking off, we find ourselves, which this is a good thing, needing to hire more individuals more frequently than we have in the past. So as we've started to do that, this process that started off as maybe 6 or 7 different blocks, has now expanded into an entire process for how we're going to post the job in the first place. In addition to that, we now have a 5-phase screening process. So there are multiple different steps within this process. And as we start to expand and we start to hire in multiple different areas of the business, we have multiple hiring managers who are going to need to execute this process or facilitate it. And having a central location where we're able to expand, we're able to communicate the value and the different steps within a process, maybe standard work that happens at each one of these different steps, has become very, very valuable to us. We've gotten a lot of different compliments from candidates who participate in our hiring process, whether they actually accept job offers or not. So we at least think that they're not just buttering us up. that they enjoy the process, that it's something that sets us apart from other organizations. And being able to do that and consistently apply it, consistently execute it across hiring managers, really wouldn't be possible without something like the knowledge aware technique that we're using, that we facilitate through the Auros IQ software. So in addition to the hiring process, now the process for posting a job and for creating an opening, the process for screening candidates, it's also expanded into the actual onboarding of candidates. So making sure that we have their start date documented. There's a lot of standard work that goes on prior to the start date. Then once they start with the organization, the training that they do, some of the human resources processes that they need to participate in, they need to execute, all those are now facilitated in one place. It's all connected, and we can ensure that hiring managers moving forward are going to apply these things consistently. So the first kind of update was just with our employee hiring. As our organization starts to grow and we're expanding various different teams within the organization, the knowledge aware technique in executing consistent hiring practices has been extremely valuable for us. So our next use case update has to do with our customer growth and expansion efforts. So we've talked a little bit in the past, if you've seen this presentation previously, about the execution of a seed project, the onboarding of a workflow. We started doing that early on in our knowledge aware life cycle and kind of on this journey. And this is kind of what it looked like. We had different steps in the process. We did them, and what that's actually grown, kind of expanded into, which we've talked about in previous conference years, is the actual execution of the process. So we now have peer reviews where we're assessing risk. We have standard work where we're making sure that certain best practices are adhered to. We're making different decisions. We have certain standard timing milestones that now are being applied across the team of all 10 of our application engineers in a consistent manner. They're tracked. We're able to report out to management in a consistent manner. And there's been a lot of value just in executing a seed project in Auros. Well, once we saw that value, right, and we have kind of what we do today, which is depicted here with this method, we then expanded that out into some of the business development activities. So we've talked about that, I believe, in the past as well, where not only do we want to execute these projects well, but we also want to make sure that there's certain best practices as we're setting the projects up, as we're scoping them, as we're getting ready to embark upon a seed project, that we're doing in a consistent manner across all of our business development directors. And we want to make sure that those things are communicated and adhered to. So we've expanded into the business development activity that leads to a seed project. If you were in the breakout sessions for the beginner track, we talked a little bit about executing a seed project. We have a production ready workflow at the end of it. And then we want to transition that workflow into production. And a lot of that is about managing change. The points and clicks, pretty straightforward. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but once we get to the point where we understand the way the software works, we're able to then take that concept and apply it pretty easily. The difficult part is managing the change. So after expanding from the execution into business development, kind of in a parallel path as the business development activity was going on, we expanded into this transition to production as well. So now we have all three of these different phases or these different stages within our project lifecycle that are managed in Auros. By no means are we trying to say that we're perfect at doing all of these different things, but we have that central location where it's understood that people go, the best practices are delivered into the process when and where they're needed. Communication is not an issue anymore when it comes to lessons learned and making sure that we're not repeating previous mistakes, those kinds of things, because this knowledge aware technique gives us that central location to learn in a continuous closed loop manner and make sure that we're providing our individuals within our organization with the tools they need to perform their jobs at a high level. So once we did these three things, we then talk about, in order to grow the software, in order to provide more value, we execute more seed projects, right? So you may do more business development, which leads to a project, which transitions you to production. But as we know, there are a lot of things that go into supporting customers, after the initial seed project or after seed projects are executed. So we've now started to expand activities into just, the daily items that we do throughout the term of a customer. So there's planning for the term. We have strategy meetings that we're setting up with a lot of our customers. We do things internally, we do things externally. We evaluate the health of those customers internally, which I think we've talked about in previous presentations as well. But we now have gotten to the point where our projects are managed in Auros. The activity leading up to those projects is managed in Auros. The activity transitioning those projects to production is managed in Auros. And then all of the customer support activity, the weekly meetings that we have internally, monthly meetings that we have with customers, they're all facilitated and managed through this knowledge aware technique so that we can ensure that we're doing it consistently across different end users, consistently across functional groups. And then we have this central location to kind of manage our knowledge in a continuous closed loop fashion moving forward. So the next use case that we'll give an update on has to do with our software factory. So as the customer base has started to grow, as we've started to expand the software and the knowledge aware technique is really starting to take hold in a lot of different places. As you can imagine, we're getting requests for enhancements. We're getting requests for more software features to facilitate certain use cases that maybe didn't exist in the past. And what we're looking at here is kind of the initial cut of our release process. So we kind of depicted things out. There were certain things feeding into others. We had timing milestones, and there were a lot of different steps in this process. So we've talked a little bit about this in presentations in the past where we were able to take this information through iteration, through the knowledge aware technique, learning in a continuous closed loop fashion. We were able to kind of streamline this process into a couple different collections of standard work. So now we have steps in the process and we have standard work that occurs at those different steps in the process. We have some metrics that we track. A lot of times these metrics are being automatically calculated by activity that's going on in Auros today. But we've really been able to streamline the planning process of our actual release process. So as we started to get more of these requests, the knowledge aware technique is, getting applied in a lot of different areas, a lot of expansion at our customer sites. One of the challenges that we had is we need a way to process all these requests so that we can feed them into the actual release itself, understanding where they are, who they're coming from, what the value is associated with each one. Are there any that are similar? We started to have some difficulty managing all those requests. So we're able to process the software in an efficient way, and we've streamlined that. But when it comes to actually feeding different requests in here, we started to have some challenges. So what we've expanded the software into over the past, I'd say 6 to 12 months, is now we have change requests that get raised in Auros. So if you're in a meeting with an application engineer, or maybe you're in a meeting with a business development representative, and something comes up that could be a valuable feature in the software, we have a process now for all of our customers, for any internal ideas, where end users can come in and raise a change request. So the application engineer would raise a change request on behalf of the customer, on behalf of a prospect, and that gets captured in Auros. What that allows us to do is then start to run reports. And I know these screenshots are not the biggest, and it's kind of hard to read some of the text, but the concept behind what we're doing here is we get all these change requests in, they're in a central location, and then we have the ability to run reports that can cluster them together. We started looking into using some of the AI techniques, like matching the proximity search of different requests that have come in, so that we can identify where the value in changes to make, or in making changes to the software is. So we're able to run these reports that can then identify the changes that we want to put into our release process. And once those things are in the release process, we've actually started to manage our product backlog in assessments. So we have changes, they come in, we evaluate them, we take those and we assign them to certain releases, and then we have standard work associated with processing those changes. That standard work is managed in assessment controls. And then the result of that assessment controls is something similar to what we had in the past, which is these work items that then feed into our release process. So by applying the knowledge aware technique and starting to put different pieces of standard work in place, it's really allowed us to now have a process where whether we have 15, 150, or 1,500 customers, we're able to efficiently bring information in, assess where the value is, and then manage the standard of work associated with making those changes to feed our release process, which then allows us to, in an efficient manner, in a timely manner, get new product updates out to customers.
Couple quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. William is asking, is that change request in the form of an issue?
It is. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the different modules within our software, we have the core modules, which are the knowledge packets and the assessments. We also have an issues management module. We have a project space module. There's other modules as well, but one of them is issues management, and you can have different types of issues. One of our issue types is a change request. So when those get submitted, it is through an issue of type change request.
Okay. And Nicole is asking, what are you using as a change request? I'm not sure if you just answered this or not. A K-Pack or an issue or something new?
Yeah, it is an issue.
Yeah.
Yep. So our change requests are issues.
Yeah, perfect. Okay,
Yep.
Carry on.
Yeah. So we actually have change requests come in as issues. We run these reports. We identify the changes that we want to make. Those changes are then captured in assessments, which also produce the work items that end up going to our test engineers and our software engineers. So where we used to just have the work items and all the information for these requests was managed outside of Auros, as the customer base grew, as the amount of people involved in the process, we now have a team of 10 application engineers. As those things expanded, it became more difficult to manage that information in the ways that we were doing it before. So now we still produce the work items the way we did before, but we have a lot of different things within Auros that allow us to produce those work items more efficiently as the group starts to expand. So those were kind of some of the use case updates. Like I said, if there are things that we've touched on in the past that people are interested in, kind of how they've matured or where we are today, by all means, post some comments in the chat. If you want to reach out to me directly, I'm more than happy to have those conversations with you. But the next thing we kind of wanted to talk about was the maturity of our implementation. So if you were in the beginner breakout sessions, you saw this. If you were not, you may be familiar with this, but this is essentially kind of the roadmap that we've put together at a very high level for implementing the knowledge aware technique. So the briefing, you go out and educate people about the technique, its value. We decided we want to do a project, so we're going to scope that project, understand what it looks like within an individual organization, what the value is, how we're going to measure it, how we're going to execute it, what the timing is. We then will execute that particular project. You'll transition it to production. So we talked a little bit about that in the examples that we went through. Then we're going to repeat that cycle, right? So we're going to do adjacencies. We're going to repeat the cycle, onboard more workflows to the point where we don't have to go out and educate individuals anymore, but rather the value is understood within the organization and people start coming to us to do these projects. So there's no need to communicate or educate people on the value of the technique anymore. It's understood, and now there's demand-driven growth. And then once we have demand-driven growth and we continue to iterate and run more projects, the ultimate objective or the end goal, you could say, is this enterprise capability where the knowledge aware technique just becomes commonplace. Like, it is standard. It's the way that you manage your knowledge. It's not something that's happening in a couple different groups. This is kind of the maturity or the roadmap that we talk about. So with our organization, we kind of started over here, and I think it's just like any other organization. Change is something that has to be managed, and there were certain scenarios where we needed to educate individuals within the organization and scope projects and execute those things and see how it applies to various different parts of our organization. I think from a technical perspective, there was always buy-in. But when we started to go outside of the technical aspects of what we do, just naturally, I think a lot of times people weren't sure if it applied. So as we started to educate, run different projects in different departments like finance, different departments like marketing, we started to then run those adjacent developments. And now I think we've gotten to the point where it's demand-driven growth. I think we have a lot of opportunity within our organization but we have people coming to us saying, hey, do you think this would be good in Auros? Hey, do you think this would be good in Auros? I'm having these problems. Could we use Auros for that? So I think we've kind of gone up this path. I think maybe a year or two ago, we were still in the adjacent development aspect of this. Over the past 12 to 18 months, we've really kind of flipped to where now we're in this category of demand-driven growth. And on a regular basis, I have people kind of coming to me and asking, do you think Auros would work well in this particular area? So from our perspective, our organization, I think we're starting to get up to the top of this chart. Obviously, we have a long way to go before we hit enterprise capability, because there are a lot of different things that we think that the knowledge aware technique can be applied to. But I think over time, as we've continued to show value with the software and the process, we've really gotten to the point where we can see ourselves moving up this arc towards that enterprise capability.
Great. I do have another question. Would this be okay?
Yeah.
Good time. Great. Nicole is wondering, so you changed the issue into a KPAC once it's identified as being assigned to an update?
We changed the issue or collection of issues. So I guess in our process, and I'll go back to that screen real quick. So where we used to just create a change and it would be incorporated into the process. Now we may have 5 different change requests that have to do with the same feature, and being able to incorporate those in a robust way is important to us, right? It makes us more efficient and so on and so forth. So what happens is we have these change requests that come in, we evaluate them. Let's say in this scenario, we have 5 change requests that all have to do with the same feature. What we would do is we would create what's called an epic, and that's an agile term for software development, but it's essentially a change. And that change gets managed in an assessment. So there's standard work for processing the change. So all the change requests that came in, the issues, are the background information for the actual software change that's going to be made. So it goes from a collection of issues, we create an assessment, and then that assessment actually produces one or more issues of a different type.
Okay.
I hope that answered your question, Nicole. If it didn't, just let us know.
Yes, definitely let us know. Do you have a little bit more to go through?
I have one more slide.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. So we kind of talked about where we are on this arc. We think we're at this aspect of demand-driven growth. And to kind of go over some of the statistical items that are in Auros specific to our implementation. We reported on some of these things last year, but we kind of pulled some of the numbers out again for this presentation. So we now have 40 distinct workflows or communities of practice in our instance of Auros. So that's up from 32 last year. So an increase there of 8. In addition to that, those 8 workflows, and then just the advancement of other workflows as well, we now have 11,000 knowledge packets on our instance. So, our organization, if I go to the next statistics, has 40 distinct users. We have 11,000 knowledge packets, because as we start to implement more workflows and we start to put more processes into the software, the knowledge that we're capturing and managing with this knowledge aware technique is increasing, and it's manageable, and we're able to do it in an efficient manner because we have the knowledge packets, the assessments, and we're not caught chasing things around in documents anymore. So our knowledge packets went up from 10,000 to 11,000. Our distinct users last year was 40. We're still at 40, so that held steady from last year. But one thing that was kind of interesting to me, and we have kind of quarterly town halls where we'll report this information out, but the system actually tracks the different knowledge events per day. And last year in 2020, we had approximately 1,000 knowledge events per day on our own instance where we manage our production work. This year, our average now is about 2,500 knowledge events per day. So our users stayed the same, but our knowledge packets increased by 10%. Our workflows increased by 25%, and our events per day actually went up by 150%. So as we start doing this and we start putting these things into use, there are a lot of areas where we think we can still go. We think we have a lot of room to grow from here. But this kind of gives you a high level view of just some of the statistics associated with the usage of the software here at our organization.
Perfect. So I think we have the questions answered, all of them that came up. And Nicole did say, yes, you answered the questions. And yes, it's time for the random drawing of the Auros Yeti cooler. That's right. It is. And it is a random drawing. It's being sent to me. I'm not drawing. Behind the scenes, it's drawn. I've also put the survey link in the chat, so you can click on that. But in the meantime, oh, thanks for putting that up. Yes. Oh, yeah, there's a QR code too. Yeah, right. Cool. So you can also click the link. But let's go to the drawing slide again, because you've teased us with that. Thank you. Okay. Must be present to win. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. This is what I'm getting now. The winner is Josh Duvall from Spraying Systems. Woohoo! Thank you. Woohoo! Congratulations. And we will contact you to arrange for shipment. Someone's typing something to me now, so I just want to make sure that I'm not missing an announcement. Yes, that's right. Josh is the winner. That's it. That's it. I already knew that. I got it. Cool. Okay, our next session is a panel discussion on common concerns with admins from Ford Motor Company, Navistar, and General Motors. And that one starts in, I guess we have a few extra minutes here. So you can take a little extra break. It starts at 3:50 p.m. Eastern. So thank you, Josh, and thank you, everyone. And congratulations to the other Josh.